Support for WUWM podcast comes from Hop Harvest and Vine and Good Harvest Market in Pewaukee, part of One Destination, combining farm-to-table dining, local craft beers, and organic groceries under one roof. More at goodharvestmarket.com.
You're listening to Lake Effect Spotlight from WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR station. Here's one of our favorite conversations about the people, places, and organizations that shape Milwaukee.
We all know about Smokey Bear, the iconic mascot for wildfire prevention. But have you heard of Torchy Timberloss? He's Wisconsin's very own fire mascot, who recently came out of retirement. Torchy is a devilish-looking flame that dates back to the 1950s. The Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources says Torchy's image has evolved over the years. Nowadays, he's focused on spreading the message that not all fires are bad. Koele is a wildfire prevention specialist, and Michele Witecha is a prescribed fire specialist with the Wisconsin DNR. They join Lake Effect's Xcaret Nuñez to share Torchy's story and the benefits of prescribed fires.
I gotta start off by saying I am absolutely obsessed with Torchy. Catherine, can you describe what Torchy looks like and introduce him to our listeners?
Well, on behalf of the entire fire program, we are all obsessed with Torchy as well. So thanks for the interest. Yeah, so Torchy Timberloss, he's kind of iconic and very unique to Wisconsin. He kind of originated in the 1950s, kind of about the same time Smokey Bear came on the scene. Torchy himself is kind of a little cartoony flame, and that's kind of how he's looked. He has a little bit more friendly look in the 70s and 80s, and like I said, we're trying to bring him back, but obviously with everything, there's evolution, and he's making some changes.
So can you walk me through the evolution of Torchy's story? What was his original message or purpose, and how has that changed over the years?
So he was originated by Harry Allman. He was a draftsman for the Forest Protection Headquarters in Tomahawk. So back in the day, though, Torchy was he was not one of the good guys. He was kind of the anti-Smokey, if you will, at the time, a little evil, devilish-looking creature that was a menace. Fire was bad, and at the time, it made sense because post-World War II era, the timber industry was booming, and a lot of our forces were fighting wars and we're not fighting fires at the time. So fire prevention was critically important to save the timber industry. But he made appearances here in Wisconsin and in publications and cartoons, posters, coloring books. And by 1958, the concept kind of ran its course, and Torchy Timberloss kind of disappeared from some printed material at the time. But he also made a comeback in 1978 with Earl Meyer. He was an area forest ranger, then later became the fire prevention law enforcement specialist for the state. And now we have the current version, which we are seeing a little bit more today, kind of still lingering on as stickers or in old posters stacked in ranger stations across the state.
Yeah, and you walked me through a bit of his evolution. What does Torchy represent today?
Great question. So, again, his original name was Torchy Timberloss, and we'd like to kind of see the Timberloss reference kind of go to the wayside. Smokey did a great job. He over the years, he's iconic, almost too good of a job in some respects, because it did kind of deter some of the good fire in the landscape over the last several decades. So. And Torchy's kind of the same. So, again, just more unique to Wisconsin. But so we'd like to see him kind of evolve and change into representing more of the good fire.
So you bring up an interesting point about Torchy's message. Michele, I was wondering if you could tell me more about what good fire is or prescribed fires and why they're beneficial.
Prescribed fire is typically designed by a planned application of fire within a set perimeter for a specific reason. It removes that dead vegetation. It provides a free layer of fertilizer because that ash is nothing but deconstructed nutrients for animals, but it's also all of those elements back in the ground to those root systems, whereas before they were just trapped in dead vegetation. So what this does is it not only provides better nesting, foraging, and young raising habitat for wildlife, but it also helps promote these ecological services to humans.
There's also a history of this practice in Wisconsin, right?
Yeah. So Catherine did mention there was another evolution of Torchy back in the 1970s. And around this time, the science of fire ecology was just emerging. We were beginning to discover that nuance in between the damage of wildfires and what we see as positive effects from the vegetation. So over time, we've also delved into the fire history of the Great Lakes region. And we're also acknowledging the fact that Wisconsin's fire history is really unique. It's not naturally fire-based. Our First Nation tribes that existed, for thousands of years in Wisconsin were using fire as a land management tool. They would use it to promote blueberry growth in forests because that was a huge winter staple crop for them. They would use it for attracting wildlife, for hunting. And so they are really the curators of the land that we see today. And so we had to really reconcile with the fact that, all of this emerging science, all of this tree ring research history that has showed us how often these fires occurred, we have to contend with that in addition to, the messaging that we've been putting forth all this time. And so the environmental impacts, as Catherine said, both Torchy and Smokey did a really good job, and perhaps to the point where we became very knee-jerk about fire totally. And so because of that, especially in our forested areas in Wisconsin, we're seeing oak and pine, which are very fire-dependent species. In the 80 to 100 years that we've been promoting full fire suppression, we are now missing whole generations of trees from that entire era. And so that was one of the main drivers with removing the timber loss side of it, because we do know that prescribed fire is incredibly crucial for maintaining healthy forests and keeping invasive species out and promoting regeneration of those key tree species that we all depend on. So it was just very important that we took out that aspect of it to promote good fire in the forest. But at the same time, we can't just open the gates and set out running to set everything on fire. They're obviously the reasons for us being safe are still there. And so I think Torchy has found a wonderful new niche nowadays that we're happy to promote, where he is all about burn safety. So it is all about good fire, but we have to be strategic. We have to be planning it properly, and we have to be safe when we conduct it.
Thank you so much for touching on that history and that really interesting research. I'm wondering if you could walk me through some scenarios where you'd encourage prescribed burns. Like, how can people decide whether it might be the right thing for them?
First of all, we talk about fire-dependent ecosystems. So obviously not everywhere in Wisconsin historically received fire as a periodic disturbance. But when it comes to our prairies, our grasslands, emergent wetlands, savannas, forests, those were all heavily fire dependent. And so what we would advocate for is maintenance of those ecosystems. Yes, there are the things that you can do, mowing, grazing, things like that, to have that disturbance in there. But there is nothing that revitalizes that system chemically, structurally. There's nothing that benefits those areas as much as fire. And so I would say, the DNR provides a lot of resources for landowners in order to safely either conduct it themselves, or we also work with the Wisconsin Prescribed Fire Council in order to provide landowners with a list of burn contractors to call. Without this periodic disturbance, these are the type of ecosystems that overgrow and eventually turn into, full of brush or overstocked forest. And something like that is definitely what can increase the risk of wildfire. It also increases the risk of tree disease. So we definitely advocate for responsible management of these lands. Like I said, whether they want to plan it and conduct it themselves, or if they want to reach out to someone who's licensed and insured.
I really appreciate you for sharing the benefits of prescribed burning as well as how to safely go about it. I'm Lake Effect's Xcaret Nuñez, speaking with Catherine Koele and Michele Witecha from the Wisconsin DNR about the department's revamped fire mascot named Torchy. Now that we've talked about the good kind of fires, I want to talk about the bad kind, wildfires. Catherine, can you give me a general overview of what factors cause wildfires in the first place?
Absolutely. So the peak of Wisconsin's fire season is in the spring. So shortly after the snow cover disappears, prior to vegetation greening up is really that critical time period. That's when we see the majority of our fire starts. 98% of these fires are caused by people. And these are unplanned human-caused fires. And, I think as of right now, we've had to date over about close to 130 wildfires, which is a more traditional fire season for us here this year. 60% of these are caused by debris burning. So, folks are outside, and when they have the opportunity to enjoy some beautiful weather and clean up around their yards, they're choosing to burn those materials. So obviously, it's important to consider alternatives to burning that debris, or if you do choose to burn debris, to get proper permits, check the fire danger, and follow the rules on the permit. So a lot of these fires can be prevented.
So just to clarify, is the Wisconsin DNR predicting a high fire danger this year?
Yeah, so this year, believe it or not, is actually a more traditional fire season. So we're coming off of 2 years of kind of some droughty, light precipitation winter, so kind of lack of snow. A more traditional season kind of starts in the south and moves to the north as snow cover disappears. And this is a better example of that. But yeah, so we're kind of on par for average fire numbers for this year.
What's your advice to listeners on how they can prevent starting wildfires?
Absolutely. So the number one thing is to know the current fire danger. Be aware of the current dry, windy conditions. Obviously, if you choose to burn, it's really important to obtain proper burning permits, no matter where you are. Follow the rules on the permit. A lot of times people will get a burn permit and then fail to read that. And there's a lot of great safety tips on there, like your burn times. We try to avoid having people burn during the peak of the day. That 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock is really a critical time. That's the peak of the fire day. It's better practice to do it in the evening when the humidity comes up, the winds die down, and it's less of a nuisance to your neighbor. So even just simple things like having a campfire in your backyard, which does not require a DNR burn permit, keeping it small, keeping it contained, and making sure those fires are completely out before you leave.
I really appreciate you sharing that helpful advice. Before we wrap up, I want to bring it and tie it back to Torchy. Will we start seeing more of Torchy throughout the state?
Well, if I have anything to do with it, absolutely. I just love Torchy. And it's one of those things where, and I'll speak to some experience about going on fires outside of Wisconsin. One of the things that a lot of firefighters do is they exchange hats and pins and stickers and patches and things like that. And we just don't have that icon anymore. And we provide a lot of out-of-state mobilization to support other agencies. And it's kind of like our little badge of honor, I think. And I think it would be neat to be able to kind of bring some of that back. But the move to broadening Torchy's message, I think, is going to be really beneficial to everybody in the fire management program.
And I can definitely second that. We've already seen the acceptance within the prescribed burn community. To have someone like Torchy not only support good fire and the work that we do for the public and for wildlife and these ecosystems, but we also heartily cheer for him championing that burn safety message, because burning safely is the only way that we can continue to increase burning on the landscape. We're really proud to have it. There's obviously a lot of, historical pride with it. And I really look forward to using Torchy as well as Catherine to promote that message moving forward.
Well, I really appreciate you both sharing that history and that badge of honor. But yeah, Catherine and Michele, thank you both so much for sharing such great information and telling me more about Torchy.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it was super fun. Thank you.
Catherine Koele is a wildfire prevention specialist, and Michele Witecha is a prescribed fire specialist with Wisconsin DNR. They spoke with Lake Effect's Xcaret Nuñez. You can hear more of their conversation at WUWM.com.
Lake Effect is a daily talk show on WUWM, Milwaukee's local NPR station. It's a show where we share the stories about the people, places, and organizations that shape the city. If you enjoyed this episode of Lake Effect Spotlight, subscribe to the podcast. You can find all of Lake Effect's conversations at WUWM.com/Lake Effect, and we're on the radio Monday through Friday at noon on 89.7.
You know, every day on Up First, NPR's Golden Globe-nominated morning news podcast, we bring you 3 essential stories. At the heart of each story are questions. What really happened? What really mattered? What happens next? At NPR, we stand for your right to be curious and to follow the facts. Follow Up First wherever you get your podcasts and start your day knowing what matters and why.